All right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. Today is Tuesday, March 12th of 2024. Looking ahead, we have a 10-game NHL main slate today, as well as a 7-game NBA slate. And then the Players Championship for PGA is creeping up on us really, really closely here. So it should be a fun day of DFS, should be a fun week of DFS. For those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Andrew. I'm one of the coaches over here at SaberSim. This is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all DFS related questions. You get your questions in one of three ways here. First off, send us an email, support@sabersim.com. Second, post it live in the YouTube chat. Third way, post it in the office hours channel in our Discord server. If you're not in our Discord and want to get access to that channel, there is a link in the description of this video. You'll also get access to our similar channels, individual sport channels, and you get access to the rest of the SaberSim team here. So can't say enough good things about the Discord. We do the show Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern. We do the show on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern. So tune in, get your questions answered, and hang out with me here. But with that said, going to get the app pulled up here. We do have a couple questions in the queue here to get us going. So give me 1 second to get those up. All right. Sorry about that. So looks like first question here came in from Great White Shark in the Discord. So going to open this one up and get this one posted. Question says, I have followed ownership data on SaberSim versus the actual in GPPs, PGA, NBA for a while now, and they really don't well align much to the time versus projections that do. How is the predicted ownership arrived at? Does this inaccuracy make using ownership filters as a rule a poor choice? Yeah, I mean, we get questions like this, from time to time here. I will say that, if you've been following it, if you have like data, if you have, something that you can share in the Discord to like say like, hey, this is the predicted ownership. This is, how accurate you guys are. I know people have like done tests on this with like PGA ownership, like in the past, like stuff like that is pretty helpful, tracked across days, across weeks here. So if you have any data like that you want to share, I encourage you to do it. We're always looking to improve our processes here, but kind of just like blanket statements like these, like don't really give us like any actionable info or like anything to like really like digest and analyze here. So if you have that data, I would love to see it. But other than that, how we arrive at the ownership projections is, really interesting, right? So we've done this big project where we went from having one set of ownership to now having 13 sets of ownership. So like what we figured out is like, hey, just predicting ownership for the, $15 150 max on any given night, isn't that the ownership there doesn't reflect very well for single entries, for 20 maxes. You can't just like use it across the board here. So what we did is we wanted to make our ownership projections better. So what we said is like, hey, why don't we look at like, different stakes? Why don't we look at like low stakes, medium stakes, high stakes? And we set out on this project to create 3 sets of ownership projections. Well, when we did that, what we figured out looking at the data was like, hey, there's actually a lot of differences even within these categories based on the number of entries that you can enter. So, we ended up creating 13 buckets of ownership here from the project. So we went from, 1, we set out to get 3, and then we ended up with 13. So I say that to, let you know that like our team is always going to go like above and beyond to make our product better. So that's why I encourage you, or anybody listening to, share those findings that you have over like a long period of time. And, I'm sure that the team would love to see it as well and see if we can make our bucket ownership even better than it is. So those are my thoughts there. Good question to get us started. Next one here in the Discord. Okay, so I know we are aiming to play as many unique lineups per slate as possible, and our contest sims give us different lineups for 20 maxes than they do for 3 max and single entry. In general, do we opt to just look for X total lineups within our current build / contest sims to ensure uniqueness, or do we set our multi lineups then refilter for the 3 max single entry by whatever metric we have been using, even if it leads to having some non-unique lineups between contests. Okay, so I think the question here is like mostly about like, hey, how do you use multiple contest sims with and fill your lineups in a unique way, right? That's like basically what the question's asking. Like, hey, how do I do like a 20 max contest sim, a 3 max contest sim, and a single entry contest sim, and not, duplicate lineups across those? So what I would do here is like, say, I'm playing like the night slate tonight. So I'm going to go and grab my entries file, and then I'm going to set up a couple contest sims, right? So I'm going to do a 20 max. I'll do this one where I have 5 entries, and then I'll do a single entry, right? So a little bit of a mix. So one. So now that I have the 3 contest sims set up, I'm going to run my lineups, and I'm typically just building them all together here. Really, I do that for like time savings, mostly in NBA. If you're playing like some of these turbo slates, you can probably do like a build for single entry and 3 max, and then a build for 20 max and 150 max. But I don't know how much the sliders change on some of these like smaller slates. We could actually take a peek here. So sim diversity does jump like a little bit here. So I think it's like fine if you want to. 0.8, 0.9 is not like a huge change. So I'm probably just doing it together, just mostly for like time savings, life decisions, and time constraints. But from here, right, I have my lineups built. I'm going to run my contest sim. I'm going to scroll over to the right so I can see my exposures, my pool percent, and my leverage here. And then I noticed that I have 55 lineups or 55 entries. So I'm going to build 55 lineups. So when this contest sim ends, I'm going to go into the my lineups box and then just change the number there. So we're just waiting for the contest sim to finish. All right. And contest sim is done. So now just going to change the lineups from 20 to 55. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is like, hey, we singled out 3 contests, a 5, a single entry, and a 20. So now that I have all 3 contest sim results, I can go and sort by each individual contest's results. So I'm going to start with the 20 max. I'm going to go to RAROI. For this contest, I need 20 lineups. So then I'm going to change the my lineups box to 20. I'm going to settle on the 20 lineups I want. I'm going to recheck only the 20 max, and then I'm going to hit save. And then you're going to see the source get updated to say build 1 with a timestamp. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to uncheck that one and then go to my next one. So let's say the one I did 5 entries in, right? So then I'm going to go to the next contest sim. I'm going to switch my sorting metric, but before I save to my contest, I'm going to trash the 20 lineups that I already used. I should have done this one step prior. I should have done it while sorted on the original contest sim. So I'm just going to switch back. So what you should do here is fill the lineups, come back, trash the 20 you used. That way they go away, and then switch sorting metrics. So like that's actually the right sequence of events here. That way the lineups don't change. And then now I have my 5 lineup contest. So then I'm going to go save. I'm going to select that contest. I'm going to fill it in the to 1 for the last contest I'm filling here. Switch my single entry to my single entry contest sim. And then I'm going to go and fill that 1 contest now. And then that is like what I would do if you want to use multiple contest sims for your 20 max, 3 max single entries. And every time I use it, I'm trashing it so it doesn't get used again. So hope that makes sense. I think that's what you were asking, but if you were asking something different, just let me know. All right, next question here from Marcus. What's the best way to distribute your lineups across different NBA contests? Should I just make the same amount as my entire and randomize it, or is there a more systematic method that's recommended? Okay, so good question. So it's like, say, hey, now let's do a different example. Let's say I'm building all of my lineups together and I have 55 lineups and I have 55 entries. How should I fill my contests? And what we recommend is to use one of the unique options, unique random or unique rank. What unique does is it makes sure that it uses every lineup before reusing any other lineup. So here, what it would do is, if I were to use unique rank, it would put the top 5 lineups in the top contest, or I'm just going to sort by entries actually. So the top 20 contests, top 20 lineups go in the first contest, second 20 lineups go in the second contest, and then the next 5, and then the next 5. So it's going to use all 55. Now, let's say that I had 50 lineups, but I have 55 entries. So what's going to happen in a unique rank is that it's going to use the 50, and then when it runs out, so it's going to put 20 in the 20 So at this point, I've used 50 lineups. Well, I still have 5 entries. What it'll do is it'll recycle and it'll start back at 1. So that's what it's doing. It's going to use all the lineups it has available before reusing any individual lineup. Now, what Unique Random does, it does the same thing as far as not reusing any lineup until they've all been used. But instead of the top 20 going in the first contest, it could be any 20. It could be, some combination. So it's going to use all the lineups before using any one twice, but it's going to, quote, randomly assign them, without doing them in sequential order. So I would recommend the unique rank or the unique random, just since we're on the topic. What rank fill does is that it would put the top 20 lineups in the first contest, and then it would treat the second contest differently, and then put the top 20 in the second contest again. So your 1 through 20 would get used twice, but lineups 21 through 55 would not get used at all. So, by doing rank, you're not using all the lineups. So that's why we recommend unique rank or unique random. If you're going to use unique rank, what I would recommend doing is using this little slide bar here on the left, and you can reorder these into whatever, way you want. Highest entry fees, highest price to first, and say, I want to fill this other contest first. Like maybe I want to put all my single entries, my top lineups in my 3 single entries. Well, then I would move those to the top, and then, rework the order here. So I know my best lineups theoretically here are going into, my top contests. So that's how I would do it. All right. Good question there. Jumping over to the YouTube chat. And it looks like our first question here is from Nick. Do you have any other recommended methods of diversification in place of or to be used along with min uniques? Okay, good question. So, frankly, I don't, but I've heard Max talk about this concept. Max and I did an entire contest flashback series during NFL season where we were, breaking down main slates each and every week. If you missed that series and you want to hear Max's thoughts just about DFS in general, NFL, that's over on our YouTube channel in a playlist called Reviewing Past Slates with Contest Flashback. And one thing that he talked about, which I don't know how well this applies for like some other sports, but the idea was that like, hey, quarterback ownership, you can get pretty spread out with your quarterbacks and still have positive sim ROI lineups. So what he was doing or discussing, I don't know if he ended up doing it, was setting a global max exposure to only his quarterbacks and then resetting it once the build was run. So basically what would happen, what he would say is like, hey, go to your max exposure, set a a global cap here. So maybe you don't want anybody in more than 40% of your lineups. Run your build like this. And then before you actually go to submit your lineups or select the 20 or however many you're going to use, reset the max exposure. So the max exposure works on 2 levels. Okay. The first thing it does is it works on your pool. So, when with 5,000. So, let's say that you build 5,000 lineups. Well, if you put a global max exposure of 40, what we're going to do first is we're going to make sure that no player is used in more than 40% of your lineups across the 5,000. And then what happens secondarily is, now, depending on how many lineups you're viewing, we're going to apply that same 40% to the lineups you're viewing secondary. So what Max was talking about was like, hey, why don't you put this global max exposure just to get diversification in your pool? And then when you actually go to look at however many lineups you need, just turn it off and allow the builder to give you more than 40%. Because let's say that, you have 40% of a player in 5,000 lineups. I think that is 1,000. No, that's 2,000. So that would mean that each player is used in no more than 2,000 lineups. Well, if you're only building 150 lineups, that's still plenty of lineups to get 100% exposure of a player. So he's basically guaranteeing the diversification in his pool and then saying, hey, I'm actually okay getting more than 40% of this player across my portfolio. So like that is one way to guarantee even more diversity in the lineup set that's built, and then turn it off and then look at what lineups you want to take with you into your contest. So as far as like diversification, that is one other thing that comes to mind here that I've heard a top player like Max Steinberg talk about. All right. Question from Anthony. If you adjust the total points for a team for a blowout, such as the Nuggets over Detroit, to like a 30-point blowout, does it put bench players in more and put the starters on the bench? Okay, good question. So let's say that, we're going over to the main slate tonight, and it doesn't look like Denver plays the Pistons, but, theoretical example here, right? So let's say that, there's some other game that is a potential blowout. Let's say that, Boston and Utah, right? So if you go in here and you change the team total, so think about it like this. We have 5,000 game sims of how this game can play out. So, the outcomes in those games are on a spectrum, right? There's low scoring games, there's high scoring games, there's games that are close, there are games that go into overtime, there are games that are blowouts, right? So when you adjust the team totals, what we do is we go into our database and we basically start trashing sims. And what you're doing is you're curating your pool of available sims to choose from. So if you turn this into a blowout, well, what we're going to do is we're going to try and match the team total that you've set. We're going to try and get you a group of sims that where we've reduced the number from, say, 5,000 to 4,500, and we've got rid of 500 sims that don't match what your input is. So then those sims would be furthest away from what you're trying to achieve. So then you're going to get more of the sims that are closer to blowouts, that are more like what you're predicting. And then in those sims, we understand that, hey, it's the fourth quarter and Boston's up by 20, Jason Tatum is probably not going to play as many minutes. So what you're doing is you are basically favoring sims that more match what you're trying to accomplish. So that's like a long-winded way of saying, yes, we will move closer to this outcome where bench players play more, starters play less, because we understand all of those dynamics in a blowout scenario. All right. Question from DGen said, I noticed with larger slates, even when I have the unique set to 9, I'm still seeing the same players in multiple lineups. Any particular reason? And then Nick said, you can have the same player, but the same combination shouldn't be appearing. So it sounds like you're probably building for FanDuel, because I know FanDuel has 9 players in an NBA lineup and DraftKings only has 8 unless you're playing hockey. But so the way the Min Uniques works is that, however many lineups you have, and then whatever this number is set to, it's going to basically try and find a set of lineups that match this. So one thing that can happen here, like let's say I need 50 lineups. Well, let's say I set my Min Unique to 8. Well, what the builder's going to do, well, let's try 7. it's like, hey, at 7, I can only find 3 lineups that match that have 7 players different from every other lineup. And so your number of my lineups can go down. But you're going to see here that like, hey, only 3 players are used twice. So like that follows with me as because these lineups can share 1 player. So like, in each of the 3, like, hey, they're sharing 1 across it. So if you're trying to play, say 3 completely unique lineups, but your exposures are not saying, each player is used in 1, then I would be a little bit concerned. And if you feel like you're seeing some type of bug or issue, go to the top right corner, drop down menu, go to report a problem, write us a brief description of what you're encountering, and then our troubleshooting team will be able to look into this and figure out what's happening. So if it feels like something is off, I would send us a report, and then that helps our team a lot to figure out what's going on. All right. Question from Dante said, hey, Drew, just stopped in to thanks for your explanation on ROI versus RAROI the other day. I ended up winning the $4.20 max Sunday because of your advice on that. Awesome, man. That's great to hear, dude. Congratulations. Hope to keep hearing of your success and anybody else who's tuning into the show. You guys are putting in the time. You guys are trying to get better. You guys are asking questions, and you're doing all the right things to make yourself a better DFS player. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Nick said, I'm sorry, DJ said, any way to make it so have actual unique lineups amongst generated lineups instead? Okay, we touched on this. Marky Mark said, could you detail the optimizer randomness and what would be a great range number to use for NBA? Yeah, sure. So I actually have, so if you're going to be using, optimizer mode, it's important to like understand what all these different things mean. So if I open up my build settings, go to change a build mode to optimizer, I'm going to get this randomness pop up here. And then from the randomness, you have 2 options. You have uniform and then you have normal. Give me a second here to pull up my notes on this. And then we could talk about it. Okay, so let's first talk about uniform. So this is like the definition for uniform. The value entered here will be applied both above and below the player's average projection to get the potential range of outcomes. So this is like assuming players are like normally distributed and like, hey, we're going to go 10% above their mean. We're going to go 10% below their mean, basically. Now, what normal does is you use this option if you want to upload a custom value for each player's range of values. You could do this the same way you upload projections and ownership. So what you would do is you would switch to normal, and then you would switch to custom, and then you could basically upload your own range of outcomes for the players. And then within normal, there are 3 options. There's normal Saber Sim, which I could switch over to. There's normal custom, and then there's normal global. So normal Saber Sim, it's going to use the default SaberSim standard deviation values for all the players. So you don't see them here in the app, but if you actually download the CSV on the home screen here and you open up the download, we actually have standard deviations for all the players here. So if I just like pull up my full screen, what you're going to see is like these 3 columns here, AT, AU, AV, and AW, 4 columns actually. It'll say DK standard deviation, FanDuel standard deviation, Yahoo standard deviation, and Owner's Box standard deviation. So we have a couple of options for you there. So like those would get used if you were using normal SaberSim here. And then we have normal custom. And then what normal custom is going to do is it will use custom data that you have uploaded as a standard deviation for all the players. So if you have something different, but you want to upload those like the way kind of I just showed you, then I would use normal custom. And then what normal global is going to do is going to set the standard deviation for each player to the entered percentage relative to their average projection. So, you could have 2 players with a similar standard deviation, but if their average projections are different, then or you could have like the same, percent randomness, but if their average projections are different, they're going to have a little bit different range of outcomes. So those are all of the definitions for the different randomness options here. All right. Question from Neil. Hi, Andrew. I think I have a good example for an ownership discrepancy. On Saturday on DK, Gafford was projected for 20% and came in at 57%. It was first game of the slate, so late swap not an issue. Thanks in advance for your help. And let's go SaberSim. Okay. So little challenging. Let's just go to Saturday. And let's go to Friday. Okay, so I think we're talking about this Dallas-Detroit game here. I know that Gafford just recently moved into the starting lineup here. So what we could do here is we could basically do kind of a check, right? So we look at flagship MME. This is pre-slate. He's 26% owned. But then, because the live projections are using his actual ownership in the contest, we can go in and see. And actually, it's actually right here for us, I think. Flagship MME live. So you're right. He did come in twice as heavy here. So examples like this are good because I could kind of take these back to the team and basically say hey, these are good examples. So, I appreciate the insight. Neil, I appreciate the insight from somebody else posted it here. I think it was Great White Shark. So things like this are good. I would say that sometimes here, because I was playing this slate, is that there's two things here. So one is kind of why do you late swap? So when you late swap, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get players at an ownership discount. So what you're trying to say is hey, if what's a good example here? Let's say that Nikola Jokic gets ruled out in one of the later games. Well, maybe Jamal Murray comes in at 30% owned. But if Jamal Murray was not, but if Jokic was ruled out, hours to the slate starting, maybe Murray comes in at 60%, right? So that is an ownership deficiency. So one thing I think that can happen here is hey, when this news comes out for the first game of the night, when Gafford is starting for the first time, and maybe people are going to want to play him more. And that sometimes is more along the lines of what you see in NFL and golf with players getting steamed up over the week here. We'll definitely see something like that in the players probably, where it's just hey, there's just going to be this one golfer, projected for 30% and they just come in at 40 or 45. So some of those things are hard to know, but I think what you can do here is build up kind of an intuition and just understand hey, this player is a value play. There is not a lot of value, coming up here. Maybe they're just going to end up in more lineups because people are going to want to secure that early value, even if there's questionables on the slate. And it looks like, Trace Jackson ended up playing here. I don't know when that news came out, but let's say Golden State announces late that he's going to play, right? You probably get him at an ownership discount. So just kind of be aware of some of those game theory things in the meantime, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at some of these things and improve where we can. But I think that there's always going to be game theory components, people, just identifying that early value, guys starting for the first time and just kind of jam him in. And I think that you could be conscious of those things over time here and, help your own ownership projections by just building up this intuition. So not trying to say we're going to ignore it, but I'm just trying to give some tips in the meantime, because I think some of those things go a little bit slower. All right. Question from Eric. Can you talk about the standard deviation? Do we want low numbers, high numbers? What does that metric indicate? Okay. So it sounds like we're talking about the contest sim standard deviation. So a good way to think about it is, the same way a player has a distribution, when I click on any individual player here, I can click on Kevin Huerter and I go and I see his distribution. What we were doing is we were summarizing all of his fantasy outputs across all of our game sims. Well, when we run, the contest sim 100,000 times, you also get a lineup distribution. You get a payout distribution for a lineup. So what the standard deviation is describing is, hey, what does that range of outcomes for the lineup look like? And typically here, lineups with a higher standard deviation are going to be a little bit more boom and bust. Lineups with a lower standard deviation are going to be a little less variant. And, it's interesting, right? Like you kind of want less variance, right? You want to try and lower your variance any way you can. But some of those higher, like, I guess basically, like, with more upside comes more downside. So like if you're okay with that risk, then yeah, you can like lean on like the higher standard deviation like side of it. But if you're, a little more risk averse person, maybe you want to try and play like some lower standard deviation lineups. But that's basically like the trade-off. That's kind of what it means. And I'll let you figure out, what you want to do with that information. All right. Question from Sean. How do I eliminate tight end from the flex? Good question. I did not know it was football season, but either way, I can show you guys how to do that. So let's say that, you're playing NFL, let's say not NFL. Let's say you're playing NBA tonight, and for whatever reason, for whatever reason, is I would go over to my utility lineup slot. And then in this slot, I can manage the players that are available. So if I look at my exposures, I see I have some power forwards. Well, maybe I don't want any power forwards. So then what I'm going to do is right click on position. And then I am going to select anybody who has a power forward only designation. Maybe I don't want to play guys that are only power forwards. So then now that I've filtered for them, I can go to the left mass uncheck button. I can uncheck them all. And then I go back to position, right click on the column header name, reselect all the positions. I hit this apply. And then now it will make sure that any player used here is not solely a power forward. So this, is a lot more common in like football, but I mean, hey, UFL is coming pretty soon here. So maybe somebody needed to see that. But that is how you manage players in your flex. I think people will do that like for hockey. Maybe we could have done like a hockey example. If like you don't want any defensemen in your utility, you would basically do it the same exact way. All right. Question from Marcus. Can you give me a quick rundown of what RAROI means? Good question. So it stands for risk adjusted ROI. So when we created the contest sim metrics, we originally just had ROI, win rate, cash rate, standard deviation. Well, what we found was that, some of the lineups that were the highest ROI were also really, really risky. And the reason for that is because they would be super low ownership. And when they did well, they would just have a very clear and obvious path to first place. So oftentimes, we released them during baseball season and you would just see all of these stacks against the chalky pitcher. And so we wanted to figure out a way to like help people play lineups that were a little less leveraged. And what we did was we went and did the omega ratio of the lineups, which is this fancy mathematical formula that basically looks at how often the lineup wins and how much it wins versus how often the lineup loses and how much it loses. So from there, what we do is we coined the term risk adjusted ROI because we're still taking. So right now, when people ask like, hey, what sorting metrics should I use? RAROI is our go-to. We would recommend it. The good thing about it is that it's looking at all the other metrics and then giving the lineup a score as opposed to just describing one piece of the contest sim here. So that's what RAROI means. And if you have any more questions about it, just let me know. But with that said, it looks like we're all caught up in the office hours channel and in Discord here. I'm sorry, and the YouTube chat. So appreciate you guys tuning in and hanging out with me, asking questions. We get more and more viewers every day. So I appreciate it. Just shows that the channel is growing. I hope you guys like the content that you see here. And until tomorrow, I will be right back here Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern for our next show. So until then, everybody, take care. Good luck. I'll see you all. Thanks. Bye.